The PMD Pro1 guide subscribes to a simplified log frame containing 4 levels in the hierarchy of objectives and 4 levels across the top. This means that the overall matrix has 16 cells. The 4 levels of the PMD Pro log frame are activities, outputs, outcomes, and goal. This is called the vertical logic. Starting from the bottom, the vertical logic reads something like this. If adequate resources and inputs are provided, then the activities can be conducted. If the activities are conducted, then the outputs can be produced. If the outputs are produced, then the outcomes will occur. If the outcomes occur, then this should contribute to the goal. Goals represent the broad development impact to which the project contributes and usually start with words like to increase, improve, etc. And it's in the future tense. An outcome describes the development change that is expected at the end of the project and is usually expressed using words like increased, improved, etc., and it's in the past tense. Outputs are the direct or tangible results, usually goods and services, that the project delivers and which are largely under project management control. Typical words are produced, built, understood, and that would be in the past tense. Activities are the task or the work that needs to be carried out to deliver the planned outputs. They use words like prepare, design, construct, research, etc. And that would be in the present tense or in the active tense. We will now have an exercise that's intended to help you understand the means to end logic. I'd like you to study the hierarchy of objectives that's on this slide. Note that this is just a summary version and not the complete project description. In small groups or individually, I'd like you to make some observations about this hierarchy of objectives. Try to find 1 or 2 major weaknesses in the logic of these objective statements, or what I would call logic gaps. And I'll tell you there are at least 3 or 4 problems. If you have time, then discuss or think about improvements that could strengthen the logic. The first major weakness in this hierarchy of objectives would be the contents contained within the blue box at the outputs level. The objectives, reduced volume of fecal waste and household refuge, are not appropriate for the output level. They are not tangible products or services. Rather, they describe higher level change, and they'd be more appropriate at the outcome level. Another major weakness is that the statement improved quality of river water is too aspirational or too high level for the outcome level. It should more likely be shifted up to the project goal level. The statements at the goal level are too complex. The statement actually contains 2 goals that would best be separated. Contributing to improved health of under 5s is quite different from improving the river ecosystem. Also, these changes are most likely program goals, and they require multiple project interventions and contributions to accomplish. This slide shows an improved hierarchy of objectives that incorporates revisions mentioned in the previous slide. You'll see that the output statements have been shifted up to the outcome level, and the outcome statement is now at the project goal level. 2 tangible outputs that represent products and services have been added at the outputs level. And while certainly not perfect, this means-to-end logic is significantly improved. Having defined the project goal, outcomes, outputs, activities, the next question posed is what external events that are outside of the project's control could potentially interfere with the project's completion. Assumptions are an essential part of the causal logic. These important external factors should be noted under the assumptions column. The PMD Pro guide calls the combination of the hierarchy of objectives and the assumptions column the horizontal logic. The horizontal logic, as illustrated on this slide, would be read something like this. If all of the activities are completed and all of the assumptions at the activity level hold true, then the outputs would be produced. If the outputs have been produced and the assumptions at the output level hold true, then the outcomes will be accomplished. If the outcomes are accomplished and the assumptions at the outcome level hold true, then the goal will be reached. Note that the most important assumptions are at the output and the outcome levels, since the opportunity for change at these levels is highest during the identification and design phase. The activities will be broken down and analyzed in more detail during the project planning phase. Once again, returning to the example of the Delta River case study, this graphic identifies the assumptions associated with each level of the hierarchy of objectives. The horizontal logic at the outputs and outcome levels would read something like this. If quality latrines have been constructed and awareness has been raised to assure adoption and continued usage, then the volume of fecal waste discharged into the river will be reduced. If the volume of fecal waste discharged into the river is reduced and there are no new sources of water pollution from upstream or industry sources, then the water quality of the river will improve. Please think about and answer this easy question. How do you know if it's going to rain? Of course, the answer is on the screen. The signs that it will rain include the formation of clouds, change in the temperature, and an increase in the wind. Some people say that their bones start to ache just before the beginning of a rain. We will now talk about indicators, a relatively simple concept, but one that many people find confusing. In its simplicity, an indicator is a sign that something is wrong, or it could actually indicate something is correct. Like a toothache is a sign that you need to visit the dentist, or your alarm clock ringing tells you it's time to wake up. Indicators depict the extent to which a project is accomplishing its planned inputs, outputs, outcomes, and goals. They communicate specific and measurable terms of the performance to be achieved at each level of change. Indicators must be measurable. They must be able to show change over time. Similar to the methodologies used for data collection during the needs assessment, measurements arising from indicators should include both quantitative and qualitative information. The principles of triangulation also apply to indicators. Indicators allow us to follow up the extent to which project outputs, outcomes, and goals have been achieved or are being achieved. Indicators can identify variances. These are the gaps between what was intended based upon the project plan and what has actually happened during implementation. And for the indicator to measure change, it must have a baseline. Baselining is describing the current conditions as an initial reference point. Baseline information must be collected at or near the beginning of a project. Performance during project implementation is then measured against a target. Targets are also called benchmarks or milestones, are improvements, change, or achievement expected to happen during the project implementation. Indicators also help to remove vague and imprecise statements about what can be expected from the project interventions, and measuring them in terms of quantity, the expected numerical representation of what is being achieved, and quality, the narrative or pictorial description of the expected achievements, time, the period over which the quantitative and qualitative changes will occur, and location, the geographic boundary of achievement. This acronym, SMART, S-M-A-R-T, was originally applied to objective statements. Later it was decided that most of the SMART measurement details were better placed in the indicator statements. Some international development organizations go a step further and shift some of the SMART measurement details to an indicator tracking table. But regardless of the specific location, whether it's in the indicators or elsewhere, every log frame must have all the essential characteristics of being specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. There are two ways of categorizing indicators, direct and indirect. Direct indicators don't require any explanation. They mean examining an indicator and then gathering the information directly from the subject or object. Indirect indicators are also called proxy indicators, on the other hand, are more challenging to understand. They are used when the subject of interest cannot be measured directly, or if the context, the topic is too sensitive for direct measurement. Indirect indicators are sometimes used to save money, especially if direct collection of data will be extremely expensive or beyond the budget. Rather than provide a more theoretical explanation of indirect indicators, I found that it's better to have you think about examples from your own experience. Brainstorm some examples of indirect indicators that you've heard about or used. The final column is titled Means of Verification, or MOV. These must be practical and cost-effective. Whenever possible, they should build upon existing information. This column should contain the specific sources from which the status of indicators for objective results in the log frame can be obtained. Typical examples include household survey, rapid appraisal, focus groups, administrative records, or secondary data from a specific source. Words to avoid in this column include records, too general, reports, evaluation, monitoring, or any means of verification that cannot be specifically understood by the person who will actually be collecting the measurement data. We're now ready to wrap up this module on the first phase of the PMD Pro. And as mentioned previously, one of the unique elements that makes project management in the international development sector different from managing projects in other sectors is the desire to make lasting social change with the people and communities that we are working with. The upper two levels of the four logical framework examine the objectives related to the social changes desired in a development project. The intent of measuring at these two levels is to ensure that the project is doing the right things. For example, is the construction of latrines actually resulting in health improvements? The lower two levels of the logical framework are focused on the operational work of the project. The intent of measuring progress at these two levels is to ensure that the project is doing the things right. For example, is the project managing project activities and resources to deliver its outputs on time, on scope, and on budget? Are there any questions, or do you have a need for clarification on any of the topics covered in this module? We have included several study questions that might aid you in reviewing the important concepts in this module. You'll find these study questions in the subsequent slides.